be a quick little update just where we're opening up at this morning of the 4th, um, and kind of what I envision developing for the week as far as potential for a two-way position, a two-way execution on this on the S&P 500 and QQQ as far as longs and shorts being a little bit viable here on an intra-week position. So obviously we have the 3% move from the Thursday's highs to Friday's lows. Discussed why it happened and when, and why it's going to be tricky to kind of try to short this hole. That's why I said the quarter one positioning is completely optimal up here. Obviously, I don't think full size yet is very smart. I think having a little bit more room to take additional exposure if necessary is definitely a good play. But we have a large, 6-point gap, a 1% gap, right? And we haven't broken back into this range of the previous all-time highs under 613, right, from February. So until then, you have to be a little bit cautious on your execution, right? Until we see this range broken back into, subsequent structure develop, and a window open up as far as, we're now approaching or entering the Vanna Charm flows for April or August. We have to understand that this is going to take a little bit of time to develop. I do think we're developing a top that is going to potentially top us out for the next couple quarters to a year. But like I said, it's something that needs time to develop, and you have to appropriately expose yourself short side if you're going to. So with a gap down or a gap up like this, and with the draw being to 626, it's going to kind of be dependent on what happens the beginning of the week as far as my directional read. I do think that 613 and then a lower high is going to be the most vulnerable exposure for like September puts. But I also think that for this week and into next, we can see an opportunity to take some long exposure. We're just going to have to be kind of patient on it. So both SPY and QQQ are drawing into these gaps after 3 to 4% moves from the Thursday's highs to Friday's lows. We have NVIDIA with a 1.1% gap up. Nothing insanely clean about this structure quite yet as far as any opportunity that I'd like to take on options. Meta potentially putting in a UTAD. Recently, looking back at this high that we'd established back in February, a Friday high on, not a lot of aggressiveness, not really a volatile candle where a lot of inventory hands are changed. So it makes a lot of sense that we see the draw up to take out these highs. And then, nothing really aggressive as far as this follow through from the seller into the report kind of being that catalyst, the highest volume we've seen since December OPEX. I do think that this is a higher time frame distribution, and this kind of adds onto my thesis, but nonetheless, we have a small gap up on AMD, about 2.25%, 2.25%. This is still short. We have the report tomorrow after hours, so that's going to be something I look at. No positioning I'd really like on this right now. Small gap ups, everywhere else, but nothing insane. And a lot of it is just going to be, volatility rallied 50% from Thursday's low to Friday's high. And we're entering a window where volatility can compress a little bit, and we can see, like I said, that short-sided trade not really be super, super vulnerable right now because of the window we're entering and because the late shorts kind of being trapped. And when we have an aggressive VIX run and we're entering this window, it's more than likely inevitable that we're going to see volatility compress, a lot of these shorter dated puts crush, and not really as much volatility for these next, this week specifically, and then in the next, and then VIX-piration is actually August 20th is VIX-piration this week, or this month, which happens after the expiration, right? So we have the expiration on the 15th, we have VIX-piration on the 20th. So, similar to May VIX-piration, right? When that VIX-piration happens after OPEX, I think the potential for the move as far as probability is a little bit higher for a short-sided opportunity. That might be a focus on mine. But I'm thinking right now, continue to be patient. We don't really have a data-packed week. I'm focused on how we act at the lower confines of this gap. If we can see that there's a notable kind of seller pressing the gas here, and we can see the alignment of a lot of other equities, I think we can see continuation to 613, and then I think we can get a really good long opportunity to 632, right? And then it's going to be dependent on what happens at 632, how this rally behaves, and then this would be the range where I'd want to take September to potentially October expiration, depending on if this happens later in August or earlier in August. All dependent on that. All dependent on how aggressive this happens. And we do have the NVIDIA report late August as well, so that could be a catalyst. But I didn't want this gap up, so it's a little bit annoying, but it's fine with the VIX compression or the VIX drop. And the fact that we're kind of stagnant as far as the lows of this gap at the current moment in time. So if we can see some exhaustion on an hourly perspective develop into, we'd have an in long to deal with as well. But if we can see this into like, I think we have Thursday data sets, jobless claims, something I think that we can pay attention to on Wednesday or on Thursday. So it's going to be interesting. We have CPI next week, like a CPI PPI week, so that can definitely be a catalyst for a longer short opportunity. It's going to depend. My main focus is going to be the lower confines of this gap, seeing if there's maybe a short into the in long, a short to 613 would be a little bit extensive on just the lows of this gap being swept. But I think a long back up to 632 would be viable. Obviously, if we pop into the full gap fill, I'm going to focus on the short to 613. Obviously 620 first, but then to 615 to 613. And then it just depends on what happens after that. If we develop a lower high on like a progression gap within the in-walk this week, then we can carry it to 600. Maybe if we, pop up to new highs, again, it just depends. So this week I think is going to be a pretty slow week opportunity-wise, personally, potentially, because of the vol pop that we had last week, because of the window we're entering, because of the lack of any meaningful binary events. I'm going to go on a limb and say that we don't see much of an opportunity. There's probably going to be some intraday trades. We had the intraday trades Thursday that were really clean last week. I'm going to go ahead and say that there's not going to be crazy amount of opportunity for a big position this week unless we see something meaningful happen in the lower confines or fulfill of this gap from the Friday session. And then I think we can get along from 613 into a lower high that we can short again. So it's going to be a lot of things are going to set up. XLF is also a major focus of mine, but that's going to need to be on a lower high. I'd love to see this gap filled first and then a lower high develop. Would kind of line up with that golden pocket as well. So going to be something I'm pretty focused on going forward as far as this short, but it's going to be something that I need to let develop. I think for right now it's kind of a two-way trade as far as intra-week moves go, potentially intraday. But main focus on a higher time frame perspective is short. Just don't have much of an edge, I want to say, quite yet. I want us to get back into this range. I want us to develop subsequent structure. And I want a window to be where I can execute this. Flows can get shut down. August flows aren't going to be super meaningful anyways, especially now that we're approaching that end of summer of George. But I'm thinking there's a couple ways that this can develop. It's going to be all about timing, all about structure, all about how the tape feels on a lot of individual equities and individual sectors, how those look in volatility as well. So yeah, it's going to be a waiting game. I want to see how this develops, mainly earlier this week, to see if a long or short is going to be viable towards the end of week. And then next week with CPI and PPI, I'm definitely going to look for a directional read one way or the other. It's super, super dependent on what happens, right? So quick little discussion on just what is going on and what I'm aiming for with this gap up. Semiconductors, once 283 is cracked under, I believe that this is going to probably shred down to the 260s, but it depends, right? We'll see what happens. So yeah, quick little update.